everyone, and welcome to Elevating Voices Share Your Story. I'm your host, Joelle Tamraz. I'm a survivor, a speaker, an author, and a coach. And today I'm delighted to be chatting with Mimi Zieman, author of Tap Dancing on Everest, A Young Doctor's Unlikely Adventure. Mimi is a physician and a writer, and also the author of the Post-Roe Monologues and Managing Contraception. Welcome, Mimi. It's great to have you.
It's great to be here with you, Joelle. It's fun to discuss our books. I loved your memoir too, so I really appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, for our audience, tell us a bit about your memoir.
Well, it's a coming of age story that combines feminism, adventure, medicine, and a reverence for nature. It's framed around my experience as the medical officer on a very daring Everest expedition in Tibet in 1988 when I was a 25-year-old medical student. But the subtitle says Unlikely Adventure because it connects to my background, growing up a New York City girl, daughter of immigrants. My father was a Holocaust survivor. And so not who you would typically think of as landing in Tibet, taking care of an Everest team. So it's
Yeah,
sort of my how and why did I get there?
yes.
And I say that it's about the risks we take to become our truest selves because, that's what I was searching for, which I think you can relate to in your journey too.
Yeah, I was really impressed with your book in terms of, the Everest adventure and this photo, just to show it again for everyone. You can see that it's going to be something incredible just from seeing this young person in this colorful clothing up on Everest or close, and you just don't imagine that it's also such a deep inner journey. And I think that's what really moved me and hooked me. As I told you, once I started reading this book, I didn't really want to be doing anything else with my days. You know, it's a good book when everything else is a distraction and you say, when can I get back to reading? So it really hooked me. And I
Thank
think
you. That
you
means so
put
much.
so much of, your personal journey in there. And of course, growing up in New York City was something I could really relate to, but I loved hearing about your experiences. And as you say, the very consequential history of your family, how they came to be there, as you said, your father's history, so important in your young years. And, I think that's a very moving part of the book. I haven't read, and I don't think another um, child of a Holocaust survivor story. So I think for me, that was really illuminating as well.
Thank you. Once I started, I did never plan to write about my family. I think I had always had this Everest story that I wanted to tell. And when I started writing, all of this stuff came out. Well, of course, I started writing now so much later in life. And when you do that, you look at your life journey and you look at where did you come from and who did you come from? And all of that percolated to the surface and became the story. And it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to tell. But I'm glad you brought that up because, now with many survivors themselves dying off, the children of survivors have very different and interesting stories too. But I also think, like, I mean, this is in your book too, we all are a product of our upbringing, of our parents, of the families we come from, and the stories they have. And how does that propel us? In my situation, I was clearly looking for something different. Like, who am I apart from that, while acknowledging that that's so much a part of who I am, for
Yeah.
good and for bad, you
It's
know?
it's a powerful message in your book, and I think it's inspirational that way because at first we have this angst with you, the young girl and woman, and then we see your unlikely adventure. Tell us about the process of writing it and when you felt ready compared to when you actually had the adventure.
Well, when I came back at 25, I wanted to tell this story. I didn't go there ever thinking I would write a book, but I did. I was used to journaling and taking very, very detailed notes, which I can tell you did your whole life too. Um, so, I came back and I couldn't believe what we had just gone through. And it was a big climb. They were on the cover of all the climbing magazines that year. We were even in Sports Illustrated. Um, but I just could not do it. I had to return to medical school, then medical training, and I literally shelved it away for my whole life. I started writing the book 5 years ago, but it wasn't really intentional. I didn't say, now I have time to write my story. I just went to my desk one day and started writing.
Mm.
And I was between jobs, so I had time. And I made writing my full-time occupation. I went to writing conferences. This was in 2019. So soon thereafter, COVID happened and Zoom and all of this new world of being able to study online happened. So I took a lot of writing workshops. I joined a writing critique group, and we were very diligent about submitting chapters and editing each other's work. And so that's how my writing journey really evolved.
Were you ever writing and working in your medical profession at the same time? Did that come back, or are you now a full-time author?
Well, now, so basically, I'm also very passionate about reproductive rights and freedom, which I have been my whole career because that's actually my specialty within OBGYN.
Okay.
So after the Supreme Court Dobbs decision, I went back to medical practice for that reason,
Mm.
which I do very part-time. So I do writing and that, and I still have my medical book that I write. But I would say, mostly concentrated on writing and just getting this book in the world.
And your medical book you keep updating, because I understand you published it some time ago. Is it one that you need to do new editions or?
Yes, we are about to release our 17th edition, and I have worked on all of them, which
Wow.
is very hard to sustain that momentum on its topic over and over again. But, we update the medical information. It used to be a book that we would be able to get grants for, and every medical student in the US got a copy.
Wow.
Now it's just sold, but that's why we were able to update it so frequently. And yeah.
Okay. And as you started writing, what was the hardest part, you think, of the writing process for you or of this particular story?
Well, so many hard parts. The first year was, I look back as sort of blissful because I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. I didn't know what was happening, where it was going. I woke up in the middle of the night and wrote, but then the hard part started, which is, what is this going to be?
Mm.
How am I going to put it together? So structure was by far the hardest part for me. You have to think about, they talk about kill your darling. So writing that you like, but doesn't necessarily belong in the book. Readers may not resonate with it. So I had to learn, what did I want readers to get? And that was a hard concept because I know my story, but how are readers accepting the story?
Yeah.
It really helped when I learned, I think it was from Vivian Gornick, to think about myself, the character of myself, as a third person.
Mm.
So I would start talking about her, or she did this or whatever. And then, you know, really focus on universal themes and messages, and how whatever would stay in the book would connect to that and what a reader might relate to.
Yes.
But again, putting it all together was hard, especially because I did have this family part. I did have this Everest adventure part, and that was kind of hard to mesh.
Yeah, I could see how in the beginning that would be hard. In the end product, I think it works extremely well because you give us a chance to latch on to your story and really feel what you went through as a young person and the risks that you took. I think going on this unprecedented expedition. So, for readers who are, yeah, future readers who haven't yet read the book, it really is not your typical. Everest expedition? Is it because of the risk of going up? Was it the east face? And yeah, and
Yeah.
then your responsibility was huge. So if you wanted to say a few,
Yeah, the East Face had only been climbed once before our team, big team using oxygen, and we were only four climbers, a photographer and me. And that was, and you're touching on something else that became really important to me, which was I'm not writing the mountaineer story,
Mm,
which we have a lot of them, and I love them, but I'm writing the story about someone else on the team in the background, in this case, the medical support person, but also the only woman. And so it was really important to me to just have a woman's story and make it in the mountaineering tradition on this wild expedition, but focusing on a different character
yeah, yeah.
and
No,
what she goes through.
yes, she goes through a lot, readers. Spoiler alert, this is not an easy expedition. So, and so you talked about how you developed your writing craft. How do you remember how many drafts you went through, or is it kind of all a blur now because there were so many?
I don't know how you write. I mean, I write in Microsoft Word, and I mean, it was just continuous revisions, lots and lots of drafts. I did try different structures several times that were maybe real drafts, but I would say I went through 3 years of trial and error of different structures until this came about. And there's probably not one way to do it, right? It could have ended up in something else that might have worked, but um, a lot of revision. I don't have an exact number of drafts.
Yeah. No, I can relate. Yeah, until you're satisfied, as a new creative writer, because obviously you had other. Well, I think you had a prior creative writing experience, right? That you wrote a play before this.
Well, that was after.
Oh,
So
sure.
once I handed the manuscript over to my agent, which was May of 2022, I thought, well, maybe I'll never write anything again. That's okay.
Yeah.
Um, and then a month later, the Dobbs decision happened. And so I was in a planning meeting for a community organizing event. How are we going to teach people about the repercussions of the abortion ban here in Georgia?
Mhm.
And I got this idea to write a play. So then I wrote a play, the Post-Roe Monologues, and it's been performed in a couple of cities.
That's great. And how are there? Is it it's a monologue, or is there more than one character? How does it? Tell us just a
Yeah,
little bit about the play, because I am curious, but I think we can't read it, right? When one must view it.
right, right. It started out, it's about 15 characters. It started out as monologues, like the vagina monologues, but I had the characters interact with each other too. So that was sort of a surprise. And the theme was supposed to be because we actually are all connected. It's called the Post-Roe Monologues. We are all connected. So you think it's just monologues, but then there are some of these connections between the characters. It's very multi-ethnic. It's a lot of different perspectives on the repercussions of bans, including people undergoing, miscarriage, couples, adoption, traveling for an abortion, staying home and self managing an abortion, medical perspectives, clinic staff perspectives. Um, so the last performance was in New York City, which was so exciting, in Merkin Hall, which is near Lincoln Center. And we had about 15 Broadway performers and made it a big fundraiser. But that was last November, and I haven't really done anything with it since.
Well, you've been a little busy, I think.
Yeah, books take a lot out of you, and especially if you kind of have to market your own.
Yes, we'll get to that in a bit. The publishing and marketing, I'd love to ask you some questions. But what another so that sounds fascinating that you've also written a play that is so relevant as well. I want to ask a bit about like because you're a New York City girl and you then went and discovered and loved the mountains. So tell us a bit about that. That really resonated with me as well. Like how your love of the mountains started and how you became so adventurous.
Yeah, so I connect a lot of dots in the book that are kind of accidental. It was sort of accidental that I found the Rocky Mountains while I was a college student in Montreal. I passed a poster in the biology department saying, come study field biology. And I thought, I like Jane Goodall. Maybe that's for me. And as soon as I got to the mountains, um, I just fell in love. And, that summer I was outdoors full time doing field research, hiking on the weekends. And I just opened up inside, like I blossomed. This was a place that made me happy. This is, something I wanted more of. So I returned 2 summers later. And because of something that happened that summer, I ended up saying, well, I love these mountains so much. What would it be like to go to the Himalayas?
Yeah.
So I went to backpack on my own there. And so I was 22 at that point.
Much to your family's dismay, we can add, right? I do remember
Yes.
being very
Well,
worried.
you remember those days. So this was 1984, 85, and there's no internet. And I'm living in New York City. It was really hard to find anyone who had even been to Nepal, you know. Um, it was just harder to get information in those days. And, once I got to that part of the world, as you did, you see travelers from all over the world. Maybe lots of people from California were going there. I just, in my little bubble in New York City, couldn't find much about
Mm.
doing something like that.
Yeah, I've been to Nepal, Kathmandu, and to Tibet overland by Jeep. But not the the strenuous way that you went up, but I could relate to some of the places, and I have to say I could relate that awe of seeing Mount Everest. It's a moment you never forget. I don't know if it's because in your mind you're seeing the tallest peak, or if there's something there, but just pure awe. So
Yeah.
yeah. And how do you feel looking back now to that woman, the woman that you were in your 20s? How has writing it given you a perspective on yourself that's maybe different than what you had, or
Yeah, so one of the reasons I wrote it is because, again, getting to this age in life and looking around me and seeing other people's paths, I wondered what was really driving me and why did I do these things, go kind of veer off path. And, I think what was always driving me was like an intense curiosity and a draw to feel a certain way. Like I felt a certain way in the mountains that kept drawing me back. I think I was willing to take risks for those reasons. And it made me ask myself, why are other people not doing that? What is holding them back? And I know that I had a lot of self doubt and a lot of feelings of not good enough, which I'm, you know, honest about in the book.
yeah,
And so I thought, maybe that other people could relate to that. Maybe there are things, passions and curiosities that they really want to explore, but are being held back by some of the same things that held me back. And maybe, seeing this example or reading it might, want them to revisit some of those things and maybe try some of the things that
yeah.
they haven't done yet.
And that leads me to my question around you in the mountains now. You don't give us a hint, so we'll ask you whether, how that love that continued, or whether it got transformed into other, passions other than hiking and mountains.
Yeah, so I still feel that way exactly in the mountains. So for a book talk, I purposely went last month back to what I'm calling the OG mountains that I discovered, at
Right.
19 in Colorado, the
Yeah.
Rocky Mountain Biological Lab. I went back there and I was like, oh my God, I feel exactly the same, except much, much, much older and out of shape. But I totally overdid it. I ran up to do this hike. The day after arrived at 11,000 feet. I did 5 miles. I was listening to my body and saying, don't overdo it, And I was so proud of myself for turning around early before I reached the summit. And then, of course, I had completely overdone it. And, I could barely move after that. But I was feeling good,
Yeah,
and I thought I
yeah,
was being,
yeah.
um,
These are the kind
listening
of
to my
things you only
body.
realize after, right?
Yeah, exactly. Even now, I had to learn that lesson again.
Yeah.
But it was just so beautiful. I mean, I can't believe people get to live in those places and, you
Do you
know.
get a chance closer to home to go hiking or not
Yes,
so? Yeah,
yes, we have some beautiful mountains here in Georgia.
yeah.
We just did a hike in June that we had never done before. You hike 5 miles up to this inn, you stay overnight, they give you a shower, dinner and breakfast, and you hike back out. It was fantastic. So there's some stuff close
Yeah.
here.
And any plans ever to return to Nepal and the Himalayas, or have you since then with your family?
I have not, but I do want to. So I think it'll happen, but
Yeah, is it
just
something you'd like to introduce them to, or how do you feel about that?
I would. And my children are grown now. I have three grown children, so it's almost impossible for us to plan anything all together.
Yes.
Um, but I'm open to anything.
And I have to ask, another big passion of yours in the book that starts even before is the dancing. And I love that. I love because I was not a dancer growing up in New York City, but my close friend was, and I know how important it was to her. And it's the sort of thing looking back, that you wish that maybe you'd been introduced to as an emotional outlet, as a physical outlet. And do you still dance?
I do still dance. Um, I love dance. Dance gives me that same feeling as the mountains, just getting out of my head, feeling my body, feeling happy. And I have been nursing a knee injury. But until that, I was still tap dancing. So I hope to get back to that soon. And that's why I eventually called it tap dancing on Everest, because dancing represents freedom. The mountains represent that. And, that was a scene in the book, an actual concrete scene, because some people think it's just a metaphor,
Yeah,
where I did put my tap shoes on
lifting.
in the. Yes.
Yeah.
Although I'm wearing mountain boots on the cover, but I do
Yes.
have some pictures with tap shoes. Um,
I looked at that and I'm like,
and
yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
And yeah, I guess everyone has those sorts of things, but I wanted to write about that
Mm.
good feeling too.
And tell us a little bit about the lead up to publication. So, you spent 5 years writing and editing, and you had your honeymoon period, and then the real let's make it work period. And then you said you found an agent. Was that always your plan to go traditional, to publish the traditional route, or were you open to any other options?
I suppose that was my plan, but don't forget I'm starting from nothing, so I didn't really know anything. Um, so my route of finding an agent, who she then found this traditional publisher, although they're small, um, you know, is how we went.
Right.
But, it would have been fine to use a small press, um, or, or self-publish. Of course, I think the people that get the biggest boost are the people who go with very big publishers, big five presses, who have marketing budgets and sales plans and all that. So I didn't really get that with
Yeah.
my press.
How did you feel in the few months leading up to publication?
It felt so busy. It felt like there was so much I needed to do. And if I look back, I couldn't tell you what that was. So busy. And then the book comes out, and there's a bit of a relief, like, okay, well, you've done what you can do, and here you are. Um, and then you realize there's still a lot more you can do. I mean, basically, being in this situation with a small press, it's about how are any readers going to find out about your book? How are they going to find your book? And that becomes the next challenge.
Do you feel like you'd prepared a lot of that? I feel like with a book like yours, there are, as you know, so many angles that and types of readers. Had you made lists of all the, organizations or people to contact? Did your publisher encourage you to do that?
You know, I knew the big buckets, but I didn't really get into specifics. So to be honest, I still need to do that. For example, I did do an interview for the New Physician magazine, which is for medical students, because this happened when I was a medical student. But I have not then gone a step further and pitched medical groups, to speak and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of my target audiences that I really haven't even touched.
Yeah. It's a long
Yeah, so
process. I
I
could,
do feel a little behind, Joelle.
you have a long time to do it as long as you want.
Yeah.
How do you organize your day around these kinds of activities? Do you set up some time for that, or is it just in the mix? Because I found that challenging. I wasn't prepared for the ideas coming into my head and then the actual doing them day by day, because as you say, you can only do so many in one day.
Yeah, it's hard. Everything takes longer than you think it will, right? So whether it's pitching a certain organization or media outlet, um, I have a newsletter that I keep up because that's a way to reach readers. So that takes some time. I just take it week by week. It's like, what can I do this week?
Yeah.
But I'm not, organization is not my strong suit. So it's a very big challenge for me.
Yeah, no, I can relate. I'm sure you have lists and lists of lists.
Yeah.
Yeah, week by week is about right. Then I've said, no, I have to take it day by day. And then not, I look at my to-do list and there's like 10 things and that's not going to happen. So it's what needs to happen. And, I wish I feel as a first-time author, I don't know about you, but I feel like nothing prepared me for the experience and for, that putting yourself out there and the different kinds of pitching, how long each and every one takes. And I figure it can only get better and easier.
Yeah. I mean, you come from a business background. I come from a medical background, and this world is completely different. I had to get used to people don't answer your emails.
Yeah,
There's like a ton of silence.
yeah,
Um, and just getting used to this industry, like that's how it works. And also that for small books, it's really hard to get any attention. It's just really hard to break out. There are millions of books out there.
yes.
And, those are just facts that you have to kind of accept where you are and do what you can. But there was a lot to get used to with that.
Yes,
Because it's,
no,
in medicine, it's much more straightforward. You work hard, you achieve this result. It's just very much more linear.
and it's very vital as well. Not that art isn't. Art is really important. We we need art, but I can imagine, there's just different priorities. You can't delay, I'm sure, on a lot of things with medicine. They need to happen by a certain moment. And,
Yeah.
I know with the business background, but it had some similarities to what you're saying, where people did have to respond to emails and there was so much more structure. It wasn't so open-ended. And then, I didn't have to make a case for myself personally. So
Yeah.
that's a new thing.
Well, that's the other thing is like you write a memoir, it's so personal, you're so exposed, and then it feels a little icky and weird to then be like self-promoting, like read my story. And it's so funny because when I go to book talks, the best thing is hearing from readers what they got out of the book, what they're bringing to it. Obviously, I'm sick of myself. I don't want to keep talking about, but like that becomes so exciting. So
Yeah.
I love that about book talks. And I had heard that that makes it worthwhile. And it does.
Yeah. And
That's why we're writing. We want to connect with people. I was looking so hard for those universal experiences. That's what I wanted to get in my book. So it's so gratifying when people say, yeah, that's what I related to,
Yeah.
this, or that.
Did you have what is a reaction that you've had that maybe you weren't expecting? Did anybody connect in a way that, either gladdened you in a particular way or that surprised you?
Well, so there are little things. So, for example, how do you position your book? Mine could easily be called a women's empowerment story. And yet, men that I know who are reading it or really love it. Like, so then I don't want to say it's a women's empowerment because then it's like, well, why would a man read that? So that's been interesting. But then like very little things, kind of like what we went back to of like, how could someone look at my story and get something out of it? Like a friend told me her husband read it, loved it, and he had been having a really hard time with a move they had. They had to move houses. They moved to be closer to their kids, but they had lived in their house for decades and it was really hard for him. And something about my book made him like reframe that and say like, I can do this move. Like it's a new adventure.
I love that. I love
And
that.
yeah, it's such a small thing, but like that's what it is. It's like every day we have decisions and risks and new things we can try. And yeah, so I really like that,
I think
very personal thing.
yes, and I think as you framed it as a coming of age story is absolutely right, and you could add a coming of age inspirational memoir, because there really is this overcoming and some extremely difficult moments that, I won't give away if people haven't read it, but that come very early in the book. So I think just to offer one thing, I would like to read one of my favorite quotes, and just to, as we come near the end of our conversation. So I thought there are quite a few, but I'll choose this one from early on. It's unlike mom's proud voice or prickly exterior, dad's voice was gentle, methodical, reflective. Mostly he loved to be talked about and was less interested in talking. Mom's fear. My emotional signposts were opposites, overflowing and withholding. So I think for listeners, that tells you a lot about the narrator of this book and what she's going to be facing personally and then on the mountains.
Thank you for reading that.
Yeah, of course. Before we end, maybe is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to mention? And then any tips for other memoir authors? So a couple of things there.
Yeah. Well, if memoir authors are listening, I can tell you that I was discouraged a lot on the journey. And at a certain point, I knew this was the story I wanted to tell, and I went forward anyway. So I think it's really, really hard to filter out the noise that puts us down, especially when you start doing things like pitching agents. There's a lot of feedback that's not necessarily kind or generous. And so I think it's really hard to build up, a sense of what you want to do and stick to it. And it was really hard for me, but eventually I told the story I wanted to tell despite some of that feedback. So I would hope that you believe in your story. I think memoir in general, sometimes the genre is put down, for being self-absorbed or navel gazing, or why would anyone be interested in your story? And I think that we really bond as people when we tell stories and we share really personal things. I mean, I also shared bodily things. Some people like that, some people don't. I did that because I'm a physician and I felt like I can write about things like having periods on the mountain and having the runs and things like that. So it's good to make it your own. I have heard that, the more specific your story, the more universal it can be taken by readers too. So I love that advice. Um,
That's a good
and
tip. Yeah,
yeah,
I love reading the specifics that make it your story. You know, the
yeah.
feeling of walking down the New York City streets, ha specifics in Nepal even before, you give us a lot. And I think for me, I did hear another interview that you gave around the bodily functions. And I think for me, it hadn't marked me so much that if it hadn't been asked, it would have popped into my mind. And I think possibly it's because also I'm a fellow traveler and I know that there are real difficulties. We're human. Everyone goes to the bathroom, all women have had periods. So I think and it's these things that we're probably thinking on your behalf. Gosh, how is she coping with that? And I think you're letting us in to how you're coping, with food and situations and physical hardship, as well, that you're
And
going
that's the other thing. And that's the other big message is that we often underestimate ourselves, right?
through.
And I mean, from your book too, this was a big message. There's so much more that we're capable of than we necessarily think we are. And so, again, another reason to put ourselves out there and try if there's a passion or curiosity calling to us to try.
Yes, yes. There's a lot of vulnerability in your book at the same time as you're overcoming these really difficult situations. I think you've struck the balance really well. And where can
Thank you.
readers find your book? Where would you like them to acquire it or read it?
Well, I'm on it, it's on all the online booksellers. You can ask your local library to order a copy. It is on Audible, or wherever audiobooks are sold. So there's an ebook version, a paperback, and an audiobook.
That you've recorded.
Um,
Yeah,
so
that you've recorded. It's
what?
your
Yes, that I recorded. Yes, yes. So, and I know that you're in the UK. It is available on Amazon UK too. And I forgot to look up at least one bookshop there
yes. And
that I
we
should
can
have looked
also
up.
have it
Um,
ordered in to our bookshops here if we want to.
yeah, because it is distributed in the UK, so
Okay.
it can be ordered there. Um, yeah,
Right. And
and
where do you want people to follow you or, find out more information about you?
my website is one word, mimiziemanmd.com, MIMIZIEMANMD.com, and links to order the book there, to sign up for my newsletter, which has medical news and some inspiration from art and nature and essays and other things.
Well, thank you so much, Mimi. I really appreciate you're taking the time to chat with us today and share a bit more about your journey. And all this information that Mimi just said at the end will be in the show notes. So you don't have to write it all down, or if you missed it, it will be in the notes.
Thanks so much for this opportunity, Joelle. It was great talking to you. Really, really appreciate it.